can't be the only one that treats the rest stop exits like pit out. At least to the speed limit, you know. And 55 miles an hour. Welcome back to Lap of the World. I'm Richard, and today we are on Interstate 40, headed down towards Augusta, Georgia by way of North and South Carolina, to a racetrack that I'm betting you've never heard of. And yes, I see you over there furiously trying to Google this. But don't worry, it's not just you that's never heard of it. In fact, anybody who's been looking for an active road course in Augusta, Georgia, hasn't been able to find one for the past 48 years. And that's because Augusta International Raceway closed in 1970. And that's unfortunate because I think Augusta International Raceway, its location notwithstanding, could have become one of the crown jewels of road racing in the southeastern United States. We're talking about a track here that in its day was longer than Road Atlanta, had more turns than Atlanta Motorsports Park, and a greater overall elevation change than either of those tracks. This does beg a question, though, I admit. Why am I driving the 5 hours from Knoxville to Augusta, Georgia, if there's not actually a racetrack there? The city of Augusta has actually built a public park where the infield of the 3-mile road course used to be. In doing so, though, they haven't actually demolished all of the track surface. In fact, the vast majority of the track is still there. That's the part that's kind of cool. I'm hoping to be able to actually, walk around the old surface and see what a lap of the track would have actually been like. I'm pretty excited, but for now I'm going to get back to driving because I've got about 4 hours left, and I'll pick you guys up once we get to the park. If you're wondering how to find Augusta International Raceway, you just need to look up Diamond Lakes Regional Park. A library, along with campgrounds and courts and fields for various sports, now occupy what was the infield of Augusta International's 3-mile road course. Arriving mid-afternoon, I started my tour with a stop at the Rex White Motorsports Memorial Plaza. Here stands a monument to the old track and the drivers who raced on it, as well as a set of commemorative benches that also serve as seating for an outdoor learning area. The memorial and learning area were made possible by the Augusta International Raceway Preservation Society, a 501c3 nonprofit, in conjunction with 5W Kids, Georgia Racing Hall of Fame, Augusta and Richmond Parks and Rec, and the Augusta Public Library System. If you'd like to learn more about the Preservation Society or support them, I've left a link in the description below. More than one of the members helped me with research for this video, so check them out. Moving on though, to get from the monument to the old track surface, you just have to take a walk into the woods behind the library building, and then onto the old pit lane. 50 years ago, this pit wall would have separated up to 28,000 fans from the support teams, with then just some knee-level piping serving as a guardrail between the crew area and the hot pit lane. So here we are, in the pits, as it happens, of old Augusta International Raceway. And what I'm going to try and do is walk a lap of the old circuit and kind of take some video and pictures along the way with the aim of trying to piece together a lap to give you guys an idea of what it might have been like to drive around this track back in the day. Now, if you can't tell already by the state of my shirt and the sweat on my brow, this is an act I may regret, given that it's 90 degrees here and I'm carrying a not insubstantial amount of camera gear with me. But that's okay, sacrifices must be made. As we make our way around the course, me on foot, you by way of video and photos, I'll keep track of where we are on an outline that I'll put in the lower left corner. As we head towards pit out, you can see the irregular, often grass-filled trenches left from the deliberate scarring done to the track soon after it was closed to prevent people from using it illicitly. So coming straight out of the pits, this track does not screw around. I don't know if you can see that behind me or see the degree to which this just drops into a bowl. I can only imagine coming out of the pits, you'd probably have to stay along the top of the bowl there before you drop down onto the racing line or join the racing line on the exit. But we'll respect the blend line and keep on going here. The Turn 1 complex is an impressive one. The banking is significant, and the approach, up a hill and over a crest after the front stretch, would no doubt have meant a very fast entry. As you can see, the banking on that turn actually gets steeper as it went past the trees where I could see it earlier, such that it really gets into quite a bowl here. Actually, I had to balance my slider on my camera bag to get it to level, so it's probably a good, this is probably 10 plus degrees of banking at this point. As we exit turn 1 and start a long run downhill, it's worth noting that just north of here, underneath a housing development, sits the foundations of a planned 2-mile tri-oval, and just east of here would have been the planned infield golf course of Augusta International. Indeed, the original proposal included 8 different motorsports venues, including a hydroplane boat course in the infield lakes. The plan for Augusta was indeed ambitious. Unfortunately, this was no field of dreams, and although they built it, no one came. For the 1964 Augusta 510, the NASCAR organizers predicted a turnout of 75,000. Only 15,000 people actually came to watch. Okay, so we've just finished what would have been a long downhill run from turn 1 way up there, and we're coming into what's going to be a left-right sweeper complex that's going to set up the technical section of the course with another series of turns after that. The actual turn count for Augusta International seems to vary by source from as few as 12 to as many as 21 turns. I'll admit I was skeptical about the higher number until I walked the track, at which point I can definitely see a case for a number of less pronounced changes of direction that would increase the tally. So I'm just now walking out of what I can only assume would have been absurdly fast downhill S's. So we've come back to the right here, and this is where the old circuit is going to join a public road again briefly before dipping off back into the woods. Alright, so you should be able to see behind me up the hill where we've come from out of those fast S's. Now the track has taken a turn back to the left, and then it's going to disappear into the woods again, just past the stop sign, caution sign thing back there. So here we go. Alright, well, we are now back off the beaten path and things have leveled out a little bit. I think we're still trending downhill at this point, but it's nowhere near as steep as it was a moment ago. So I'll just give you a quick pause there. That's where we came from. And that's where we're going. Okay, so we just come out of another sort of a long left-hander. And we're getting ready to switch back into another, what looks like another sweeping right-hander here on the back side of the course at this point. I'm going to have to pick the pace up a little bit. I think if you can't tell, I'm losing sunlight. As I continued walking, approaching the bottom of the hill, 120 feet below the highest point at the pit exit, it was interesting to consider the famous names that had driven this now ghost of a track. Jim Hall, Bob Holbert, Ken Miles, Bob Bondurant, Fireball Roberts, even Richard Petty turned laps here at one point or another where I was now hiking. All that is to say, in spite of current appearances, this was no backwoods track when it was conceived. I'm now standing on the lowest point on Augusta International Raceway, dubbed Gator Hollow by one racer in the 60s, I believe. This is where the creek that runs across the area from the spring-fed lakes in the infield passes outside of the racetrack at this point. It also leads into one of the more picturesque sections of any racetrack I've visited. Had I not been parched, hungry, and a bit moist at this point, I'd have been really tempted to set up a chair and just enjoy the scene before me. Augusta International apparently wasn't always this pastoral. At the height of its use, the site and grounds were still mostly bare sandy soil with maybe a scrubby pine tree here and there. Indeed, when asked how the track could be improved, one racer simply quipped, "More grass." I think he would probably be satisfied at this point. You can't tell me that this would not have been a spectacular turn. A lake on the inside, big sweeper with banking. At some point, approaching the late stages of the lap, it occurred to me that nearly every turn so far was significantly on camber, probably in the double-digit degrees of banking. It's almost as if Augusta International is some missing evolutionary link between road courses and high-banked ovals, some forgotten love child of Sebring and Daytona. So right after you would have come out of the spectacular lakeside sweeper, it's time to stand on the brakes and get ready for a 90-degree right. In spite of this track's location in Georgia, we allegedly have some Tennessee whiskey to thank, at least in part, for the interesting track layout. The story goes that Glenn Fireball Roberts, a NASCAR hotshoe at the time, hopped into a Jeep with the site developers. They proceeded to open a bottle of Jack and just start driving around the approximate outskirts of the property, taking turns knocking back shots and hammering in stakes. It now suddenly makes sense why the straightest part of the track is just past turn 1. That segues into another hypothetical question that comes to my mind, and that is whether this track could even have persisted into the modern era with its original layout intact. Only a few other racing venues have managed to do so. The rest have seen modifications for safety first and foremost, as well as changes to improve competition as cars have developed over time, most significantly with aerodynamics since Augusta International's all-too-brief heyday. Well, we're almost at the end of the lap. These last few turns before the front stretch is where the track, I think, really starts to show its age. And you see this tree behind me. That's not a small tree, and it's growing in the middle, in the dead center of the racing surface. So that guy's probably been growing there 40 plus years at this point. Crazy. As we watch another panoramic shot from on high, I'd like to take a moment and thank Michael from SkyG Aerial Imaging for the time he put in dodging weather and making multiple trips to the site to fly a lap of the track and get these shots. So we're back. We're about finished with a lap. At this point, we could take a right and head into the pits, or we could continue down the main straight on the left. Entering from the Windsor Spring Road entrance onto Diamond Lakes Way headed east, you actually join the old track's front stretch right after the intersection with Dave McDonald Drive, a street named for a former Augusta race winner, and follow its path until the crosswalk between the ball fields and the dirt overflow parking area. And so, after crossing the start-finish line approximately here, we would have then turned into a long uphill right-hander that would have eventually deposited us back at turn 1 and pit out, thus completing our lap of Augusta International Raceway. The fact that nearly every turn at Augusta has positive banking, and essentially none of them are exceedingly tight, leads me to suspect that this was a very fast track indeed. Unfortunately, we don't really know what that means in modern terms because the fastest cars to have run here were pre-Can-Am era sports prototypes. Certainly a far cry from a modern prototype or GT3 car. Fortunately, we have some data to draw from and can do a little racetrack algebra to help extrapolate a comparison. First, let's compare Augusta to another period-appropriate track that we know is fast. Now, we can't use Road Atlanta because it didn't actually open until after Augusta shut down. Fortunately, there's another option. Between 1964 and 1965, both Augusta International and Road America hosted rounds of the United States Road Racing Championship, or USRRC. Road America is notable here in that, as I mentioned in that track feature, its layout hasn't changed since 1950. So we can use it as something of a constant between 1964 and now for our comparison. Next, we need a car and driver combination that ran both places at the same time, or approximately the same time. Jim Hall and his Chaparral 2A racer fit the bill in this case, qualifying first and finishing second in the 1964 Augusta race, and winning the 1965 Road America contest. Jim's race average at Road America was recorded as 89 miles an hour in his Chaparral. His race average at Augusta in the same car, over 97 miles an hour. Jumping forward 53 years, and in 2017 a Ganassi Racing Ford GT averaged around 103 miles an hour, winning its class at Road America. If we do the quick proportion, that yields a predicted 112 mile an hour race average for a modern GT3 car around Augusta International. For comparison, the same Ford GT averaged about 99 miles an hour at Road Atlanta, and the winning GT3 pace at the ADAC 24 at the Nürburgring was just a little over 104 miles an hour after the first 6 hours of that race. Closer to home, the 2014 Daytona 24 averaged 109 miles an hour for the winning Daytona prototype car. So yeah, Augusta was fast. Possibly the fastest track in North America in its day, based on this loose comparison. Okay, I'll be completely honest. That may have turned into a little bit more of a hike in a little bit hotter weather and somewhat more of an ordeal than I had planned on, but it was totally worth it. I can't believe this track. This track is ridiculous. Every single turn, I think, had some kind of banking to it, the friendly kind typically. There was that awesome sweeper by the water. The start-finish straight going into turn 1 was going to be a huge elevation change up and then a camber transition into that big bowl that we saw right out of the pit lane. Man, it's a shame. Somebody needs to put this track in a video game is what needs to happen. Because I just want to drive, even virtually, I think it would be worth it, just to see what it would have been like back 48 years ago to have one last run around this track. You know, give me a DeLorean, well no, a DeLorean, I don't want a DeLorean. Put a flux capacitor on the NSX and send me back. I want to drive it. What an awesome place. Highly recommended also. This is a great nature walk as long as you're prepared for it and not carrying about 30 pounds of camera gear. And you remember to bring water and a change of shirts, maybe a snack. You get the point. Anyway, I'm gonna go get dinner finally, get a bunch of water, change shirts, and find my hotel. And I'll see you guys in the next video, if not at the track. After returning from my weekend in Georgia, I discovered during the course of my research that my wish for an electronic version of Augusta International was already being granted by way of an Assetto Corsa mod that's a work in progress. You'll find a card in the top right with a link to the video on that creator's channel. My understanding is that it's based on a mix of LiDAR data and historic reference photos, so it should be pretty faithful once it's fully decorated and available for download. I suppose it's time to go dust off the old sim rig then.